Hi, I'm Catherine.
I'm Gail. Welcome to Women Over 70 Aging Reimagined, our award-winning weekly podcast. Please visit womenover70.com and consider joining Aging Reimagined Circle, our sustaining membership fund, so we may continue to inspire women to age with curiosity, courage, and creativity. Members enjoy monthly programming and probing discussions. We hope to see you there.
Today, we're thrilled to be talking with Ashton Applewhite as an advocate for women aging. Ashton is a celebrated expert on ageism who began blogging and speaking out about aging and ageism about 15 years ago. And her 2016 book, This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism, radicalized the present anti-ageism movement. The United Nations credits her book with, and I'm quoting, acting as a catalyst to raise the consciousness of people around the world on what ageism is and what we can do to dismantle it. So since then, Ashton has continued her blog, Yo, is This Ageist? Co-founded the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse, and she's in high demand to speak at various venues from TED Talks to universities, community centers, Library of Congress, United Nations, and her numerous honors and recognitions, local, national, international, acclaim Ashton for being inspiring, a trailblazer, an influencer, and a game changer. So welcome, Ashton, to Women Over 70. We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
I realized, Ashton, that I read just recently that your book, This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism, was self-published in 2016. Is that correct?
Yes, it was originally self-published.
And then it came out as paperback, and now all of a sudden it's one of the 100 best books to read at every age. What happened in between self-publishing and
Well,
this?
a fancy publisher had an option. They had published my previous book, which was aimed at women. It was about women who end their marriages.
Mm-hmm.
And writing a book is really horrible and evil, so I thought I'd never have to do it again. But 20 years later, I did. And when I took it to the publisher with a fancy agent and the whole thing, we had a meeting, and the editor looked at me and said, "We're concerned that no one else is writing about this."
Oh.
And I managed to say, not, "Are you effing kidding me?" which was what I wanted to say, because I knew right then I was doomed. But I did manage to croak, "I think you should see that as a feature, not a bug." But then either publishers turned it down or they didn't, show the kind of interest I thought the subject deserved.
Mm-hmm.
So I self-published it, I should say, with the help of my partner, who has been in electronic publishing for a long time. So he wrangled a lot of the technical stuff. He's the reason the book is so beautiful. I don't know if I would have, been able to do it myself. I might have settled for, a smaller publisher, although a small publisher who is committed to a topic, fantastic. I don't mean to say it has to be a big boy to, do you justice. But we did self-publish, and we sold I think 25,000 copies. And then I sold the rights to Celadon, which is a new imprint of Macmillan. And they brought it out on hardcover, I think in 2019, and then in paperback a year later.
And so in between, you have become really one of the key spokespersons for anti-ageism. And can you give us tell us a little bit about your own story of how you had the courage to write about this in the first place, and what it's been like to really command the kind of stage presence that you have about this topic.
Well, that's a separate question, which I will have forgotten by the time I answer.
Okay, all right. Answer the first one.
You'll have to throw it at me again. I mean, I'm laughing because anytime someone says, like, send us your CV or tell us your career plan, I'm just like, I have never ever had a career plan. I never knew what to major in college. I could never have gone to graduate school because I wouldn't have known what. I didn't start writing until my mid-40s, but I have written 2 serious books, and there is a similarity to them in that I write like most writers it's based in my own experience. And I had been married for 11 years, and I realized I couldn't stay married. And a chance comment of my attorney's. He said, most of my clients are people like you, meaning women. And I went home and learned in 2 seconds that 2/3 of divorces in the US are initiated by women. And it's always been that way. It's always been preponderantly women, but I was flabbergasted. I assumed it was 98% men dumping their sad, pathetic old wives for fertile trophy wives. And I thought, why don't we know this? And I started to research divorce. And so what got me going was, why is our picture of life after divorce for women so much worse than the reality? And it ended up as a book called Cutting Loose: Why Women Who End Their Marriages Do So Well. And 20 years later, I looked in the mirror and was like, oh crap, this getting old thing, it's happening to me. And it was quite analogous, although as usual, I didn't see it except in hindsight. I started interviewing older people and learning about longevity. And it was the same aha thing of, it's not that the scary stuff isn't real, but why are our fears so out of proportion to reality? Because the fear divides us. It's bad for us individually. It's bad for us collectively, blah, 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 which I wrote whole books about. But we don't know the flip side about marriage, because we live in a sexist capitalist patriarchy where that works more smoothly if women stay harnessed in conventional heterosexual marriage. And we don't know the full side about aging because we live in an ageist, sexist, ableist, capitalist patriarchy. So it was the same thing. I don't write because I love to write. I never set out to be a public figure, to touch on your second part of your question, which I remember. But when I get an idea, it's like a bit between my teeth. It seems important to me. And I research and write and speak because it feels important to get the ideas out in the world. I hope that doesn't sound pretentious. It's a way to deal with the ego piece of it, because I feel like I'm a vessel for these ideas.
Well, you've certainly hit a nerve for sure in our society. And you make the point well and often that ageism is not just about for older people, against older people. It is really younger people, probably people of any age, really. But for women, for our population, older women, just you talk about this a lot in your book. But what are some of the sort of the myths that we really need to be aware of about aging and as we're getting older?
Yeah, I mean, just to define ageism, we are being ageist anytime we make an assumption about someone on the basis of how old we think they are. And we do it all the time. All of us. We are all ageist, no judgment at all. But it's one reason, a thought experiment I would like is for medical charts to have your age on the second page, not the first page. Your age it's always relevant. I don't want a society with no age. I don't want it whitewashed or erased. It is very relevant to your physiology and your health. But I want a physician to look at me, because they're really good at it, and say, okay, to get their first impressions from an independent age, because the minute we have a number, all sorts of assumptions click into place. It's why I don't like generational labels. And of course, women face gender bias in addition to age bias. So it's a double whammy. The stereotype I dislike the most, which is not inherently gendered, is that old people are the same. You at some moment we wake up, we're dumped by the dump truck of life into the sad, tragic holding tank of the elderly. And elderly is an icky word because it has connotations of frailty, but it's the "the" in front of it that really bugs me. When in fact, the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. That's such an interesting fact to me. Heterogeneity increases with age. So the older the person, the less that number says. It's funny. I'm having a hard time picking a specific gender thing that doesn't have to do with supposed sexlessness or ugliness or and I don't like going there because I try not to talk about women's appearances. Period. Because even if you talk about why it's a dumb way to categorize people, you're talking about it.
You're still giving it playtime. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about one of that I was really happy to see this chapter in your book about sex and intimacy.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about that in terms of what are some of the misconceptions, the ageist attitudes that our society might carry around?
Sure. I mean,
that?
We live in a patriarchy in which women's value is just as where all of our value is linked to whether or not we make money in a conventional sense. And women's is linked as well to our appearance. We are punished for appearing to age and to our reproductive status. So and I mean, in the workplace, there's just a big Harvard Business Review place about this. We're never at the right age. You're too sexy to be taken seriously, then you're too fertile to be promoted. If women get pregnant, they are less likely to be promoted. Whereas if a man announces he's going to be a dad, he gets a promotion. Then you're not worth promoting because you're spending too much time on your family, and then you're not fertile anymore, and it's all she wrote. So women, as we age, there is a way to depreciate us no matter what age we happen to be. I'm glad you mentioned that it is also, you're too young to be taken seriously. I mean, I remember I was in the hospital overnight a while ago, and I looked around the bed in the emergency room, and all the doctors looked about 8 to me. Right. And I caught myself, and I was, here they are in a fancy New York hospital. I bet they know what they're doing. And of course they were, brilliantly competent. But we all have those preconceptions. And the most important thing we can do is to think about them. The first step, think about your attitudes about age and aging. Why do we all want to know what age someone is? Speaking of sex, you're dating someone new. How old are they? Mm-hmm. Right? Do you want to start a family? Probably not. Well, that is arguably, or like do extreme sports. If neither of those are in the cards, you could make an abstract argument that age shouldn't matter at all, right? It does, of course. I don't mean to be extreme, but there is this sort of assumption that we women age out of becoming sexual beings and wanting to continue to stay sexual beings. And that is false because it's a stereotype. I do want to add, though, that there's this very, very powerful, predominant, story about positive aging, active aging, successful aging, which fundamentally means to not age, to spend a lot of money and effort trying to look and move like younger versions of ourselves and do the things we always did. And part of that myth is you got to stay sexually active. And I just want to say, you don't got to do anything, right? It's okay to, your libido does diminish in most people. If you're less preoccupied with that, that's liberating. So I don't want to say you have to ever be that there's a better or right way to negotiate any of this. For a lot of women, especially straight women who want a straight man who is a few years older and doesn't have a nutty whole second set of family with a drain and 18 children tugging at his sleeve and so on, that pool grows very small. So either if you want to remain sexually active, you need to broaden the pond in which you choose to swim. And lots of people decide it's just not worth it. And there is nothing wrong with that choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I really appreciated the way you approached that whole area, because we're told, well, you should be having sex because now we know that people do it, if they're 60 or older. But if you don't do it, then something must be wrong with you, or if you don't have the opportunity. But the way you talk about it is whatever matters to you, go for it and experience it, redefine it, It's
Yeah,
not
embrace
the sex we had when we were 20 and 30
no, but
necessarily.
I mean, I think actually that's a good example of things we do better when we get older. I mean, it's true. And for obvious reasons, for men, if your sexual prowess is measured in how long you can have an erection and how many orgasms, you are going to be disappointed. And I imagine that's really hard. For women, we don't have those specific measures of whether or not you are performing as society says you should. But if it's important to you and you are willing to embrace a broader notion of the form sex can take, you can continue to have satisfying sex. And I will plug my friend Joan Price, who is a fantastic, you might want to interview her for your podcast. She's a fantastic advocate and expert in sex for older people.
Gail, are you on the verge of saying something?
No, I'm taking it all in at the moment. I will be back.
Okay. Okay. You talk in your book also, and I've listened to some of your TED Talks and read some blogs that ageism cripples us. It hurts us.
Yeah, I bet I did say cripple.
You did say cripple.
I wouldn't say that anymore. It's funny. I'm keeping a list of things I used to say. You were totally legit to quote me, but I now understand that that's not an acceptable turn of phrase. People with disabilities have started to use the word. They refer to themselves as crips and talk about crip time. Just as some lesbians have reclaimed the word dyke and call themselves dyke. So I would not say that anymore because it's ableist and offensive. My niece is a physician, and I had a line in an early talk that she heard where I said my worst fear was ending up drooling in some grim institutional hallway. And she said, Auntie, a lot of my patients drool. And they really don't like it. And I wish you wouldn't say that anymore. And I was like, I'm not going to say that anymore. But we make mistakes, right?
Sure.
And learn. So, yeah, I mean, ageism is really a form of self-loathing. It is a distancing from our own future older selves. And it is not healthy to go through life dreading your future, just like it's not good for our psyches to look in the mirror and feel like, and we all have those mornings. Again, no judgment. I gave a talk not long ago, and I had a room for people with disabilities. So the countertop was really low, and I'd forgotten my makeup mirror to stick to the mirror, and I had to put what little makeup I put on hanging over my mirror, which was flat. And I looked at it, and I thought I looked like a Shar-Pei, those wrinkled dogs. We have those moments, but it doesn't mean I'm a useless person. It doesn't, we have a lot to learn here from the body acceptance movement. We have all kinds of exemplars out in the culture now. So sorry, I've gotten off track now. What do you want to lead?
So cripple is not an acceptable word. Right. So how would you frame that in terms of how ageism affects us?
It just
affects us.
It damages us in so many ways. Let me get around to the health effects in a minute. But what it really is, as I said, a form of self-loathing, which is a powerful idea, but so is internalized racism and colorism, people of color. We live in a world that barrages us with messages that the ideal is thin, it's white, it's cisgender, it's typically male, it's certainly moneyed, right? And the further we are from that non-existent ideal, the more barriers there are to equity. And when we see ourselves as diminished in those ways, it's not good for us. It's not good for us collectively because all prejudice operates to pit us against each other. An example for women is, women in the paid workforce arguing with stay-at-home moms about who's a better mom. It's a dumb fight, right? What we need is all the women to join forces to subsidize childcare so that women could choose whether or not to stay home. Or, the classic example of the Polish factory workers and the Italian factory workers, a century ago, underbidding each other instead of, coming together to force the factory worker to pay them a decent wage. So that is how that's one way that ageism impoverishes us collectively. It also encourages segregation. We live in a very age segregated society, and that's not good for anyone. It's not good for older people. It's not good for younger people. And there is abundant growing data all over the place about how ageism harms our health. When I started writing about this, I couldn't say that so unequivocally because I am very careful about what I say. There is now data up the wazoo that shows how having negative equating aging with decrepitude, with depression, with worthlessness harms our health. And the inverse is also true. Most of the work has been done by a woman named Becca Levy at Yale, who has a fantastic book called Breaking the Age Code, which is all about this. And her latest findings show she calls it people who have a positive attitude toward late life. That they are less likely to experience mild cognitive decline, which is a diagnostic label, which is a little bit problematic, but that's a whole nother subject. Not only that, they can recover from it. It can improve your memory. I don't think of it as positive beliefs. I think of it as accurate.
Say that again, as
accurate.
Accurate.
Because I don't want to ever, brush over the genuinely worrisome, unwelcome aspects of aging. They are real. They are made much worse by the society in which we age. But, the physical decline is real. Cognitive decline is not inevitable. But if financial insecurity, ending up alone, getting sick, those are real fears. So I don't want to brush them under the rug, but I want people to have an accurate view of those things. Take dementia. If every time you lose your glasses, you think, ooh, that's the first sign of Alzheimer's, that fear itself makes you more likely to get Alzheimer's. That's one of Levy's studies, right? Because the anxiety makes you more vulnerable to stress, and stress makes us more vulnerable to exactly what we fear. The statistic from the Alzheimer's Association is that 1 in 10 people will get Alzheimer's. That's a lot of people, but it's not typical of aging. And most of those people are in their 80s and 90s, which is, I'm not brushing that off by any means, but it's not, if you lost your glasses when you're 55, you're probably not, going to be unable to remember your name next Tuesday. And, we need to educate ourselves and put our fears in perspective. People with more accurate age beliefs are less likely to get Alzheimer's, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease. So, I'm waiting for a public health campaign it's why the World Health Organization, not the World Old People Organization, launched a global campaign to combat ageism 2 years ago. Right? Because they realized it's the biggest obstacle to increasing health span along with lifespan.
Right. Yeah.
What can we do, Ashton, at the grassroots level? How can we approach this? How can we use our podcast to we're doing it, we think, but
you are doing it. And I love that question. And thank you for asking it, because we are not going to make the most of longer lives without culture change. And, the best analogy, I think, is the women's movement, which really, God knows we have a long way to go on the women's rights front. But it's true that once you start getting serious pushback, it means that you're actually starting to threaten existing power structures. We need a grassroots movement like the women's movement to raise awareness of ageism and educate people on how to dismantle it. And also ableism. That's a big piece of this, which is prejudice around physical and cognitive function, because a lot of what we think of as ageism is actually concern about physical and mental function, which can strike us at any age, right? So So that is why I do the work I do. It is why I created Old School, which you mentioned in the bio, which is the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. The website is oldschool.info, and it is packed with hundreds of carefully vetted resources. Everything is free except the books to educate yourself, what it smells like and quacks like and what you can do. We host regular get-togethers. We have a weekly meeting, ask us anything about ageism, because it can seem lonely and you're the only people doing this. Write me a note and I'll, I have all sorts of ideas. Listen to this podcast. What you can do as podcast hosts is name the structural issues. Call out ageism. Call out ableism. Name it. Right? Because that is how we understand that there are structural forces, that it's not it's not your incapacity or your gray hair or your lack of gray hair or your wokeness or your lack of wokeness that is the source of the problem. The source of the problem are existing power structures, right? So that's why you asked that question about grassroots, because you know that already. And we do need to mobilize. The American Society on Aging has started the second annual Ageism Awareness Day, October 6th. So, if follow me on social media or follow ageism on social media, you'll find out about these things. I don't think there's going to be a march on Washington yet, but you could march to City Hall and say, you could write your senator and say, how come Medicare doesn't cover hearing aids, or dental or vision? I mean, there's so many campaigns. Is your, does your community have a community center where people of all ages can come together and do something besides play bingo? And no diss to bingo. My partner loves bingo. There should be bingo. There should be bingo for all ages, but there should be other things too, right? I mean, anything. I feel like you yourselves have 100 better answers to what, or more specific answers to what your community would like to see to make their later years better. And that's the thing you should go after. But name ageism and name ableism and be political. Don't be afraid. I mean, I don't mean be however you want to be, but it's necessary, I think, to frame it as a political and social issue, not just a set of, personal problems or personal grievances.
Well, the mantra from the women's movement was the personal is political. So, yeah, for sure.
It always is.
Yes.
And it's not about class. It's not about red and blue. Everyone gets older and everyone deserves to be heard and be listened to and be treated with dignity.
Right. Well said.
You said you made so I've been curious about that. You've been speaking out and writing about this for quite a long time now. And in 2015 or so, they said nobody's talking about this, so probably you shouldn't either. And then and so now it is, I do think that we're really are part of a movement.
I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, I do too. I do. What is it like to be the carrier to what kind of pushback do you get, or do you still get pushback?
Not enough, because I know I will know when I'm getting more pushback that we're really starting to challenge power structures. But I am glad to hear you say that. I know that a movement is underway. The reason I know it is because of Old School. When we started it in 2016, we did not have a campaign section, and it's up to 32 now. The United Kingdom is launching a national anti-ageism campaign next spring. So, there's evidence. I like to have evidence. Ageism is on many more headlines and conversations than ever before. Someone asked me a question at a talk I gave 2 weeks ago. They said, there's so much ageism around Biden running for president and gerontocracy, and that's so awful. I said, yes, the conversation is misguided, but think of the way you phrase the question. There's so much ageism around it. That itself shows enormous progress, that people saying this hideously ageist and ableist stuff about Biden say, I know this is ageist. Awareness is the first step, and so the first step personally we can do is to look at our own attitudes towards age and aging, because most bias is unconscious. We haven't thought about age as much as we've thought about sexism and racism. And we can't undo it until we become aware of it. And that's uncomfortable and unpleasant. But the good news is, and this is what consciousness raising did, and as you both also know, I suspect, you go, oh, wait. Once you see it in yourself, you see it around you. And that is liberating. And you can't get that genie back in the bottle.
That's right. That's great. I love it. Oh my goodness.
Time goes too fast, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem. Everything connects to everything else. And if you had told me 15 years ago that I would become fascinated by aging, I would have said, ew, why do I want to think about something sad and icky that old people do that I'm apprehensive about? And aging is how we move through life. We're aging from the minute we're born. And it is it connects to every aspect of being human, every field of study. It just gets more interesting all the time. I bet you're finding that in your podcast.
Absolutely. I sometimes feel like we live in a bubble because everyone we talk with has, it's not that they haven't suffered loss or hardship or had self-doubts or anything like that, but they just continuously are engaged and contributing and say, I matter, listen to me. And they just, as we interviewed a 94-year-old recently, and she said, you just keep moving, you keep moving.
Yeah. And you are doing more than your part by fostering these conversations and helping, women see each other. I mean, for a lot of women, late life is the best time of all because it's liberating. It's often because we cease to be as visible as we used to be. It's often on terms that we didn't choose, but we can control how we adapt to that and what we do with that power.
Yeah. It's power in living on the margins.
It is.
Well, thank you so much. I think we'll want to have you back.
Be my pleasure.
So willing.
Thank you very much.
And listeners, thank you for your loyalty. Because of you, our numbers are growing all across the country and overseas, and that's a good thing. Still, we need more subscribers and reviews on Apple Play and YouTube. Support Women Over 70 and let your voice be heard. Help us change the conversation about women aging.